In the last episode, the crew of Red Dwarf escaped from the virtual reality game Better Than Life, only to discover that the ship was about to be destroyed in a collision with a planet covered in ice. Lister and Rimmer have saved the ship in a game of interplanetary snooker, but in an unexpected rebound, Starbug has crashed on the surface of the ice world. Rimmer has rematerialised on Red Dwarf to find that something peculiar has happened to time, something which can only be explained if the ship is being sucked into a black hole. Meanwhile, stranded on the ice world, Lister has done the only sensible thing. He's gone to sleep, and the ice is beginning to melt. Chris Barry performs episode 5.
John Yu had been doing the Jovian run for the best part of 20 years. Not many people were prepared to spend their life ferrying human sewage from Jupiter's satellites all the way across the solar system and dropping it on the dump planet. But John Yu actually enjoyed his work. He was the king of crap. And right now, he was sitting on top of 2 billion tons of it. The refuse ship powered through the thin atmosphere and hit the thick, choking black smog that spiraled up from the planet's surface. And there it was. Garbage World. Like anyone else in a dull job, John Yu made up games to help pass the time. His game was graffiti. And he was about to complete the biggest single piece of graffito ever attempted in the history of civilization. It sprawled across a continent. It was visible from space. It was written in effluence, and it said, "You was ear." Today, he had the final 2 billion tons he required to complete the half-finished loop of the final E. 300 years after the invention of the light bulb, the human race had colonized the entire solar system. They rapidly reached the point where there was so much indestructible garbage, there was nowhere left to put it. The Interplanetary Commission for Waste Disposal conducted a series of feasibility studies, and they concluded that one of the 9 planets of the solar system had to be given over to waste. At 11:20 on the 11th of November the following year, the last shuttle load of evacuees left for rehousing on Pluto, and the planet Earth was officially renamed Garbage World. The dumping areas were strictly regulated. North America, for instance, was bottles. Clear bottles on the west coast, brown bottles on the east, and green in the centre. Australia was reserved for domestic waste. Europe got the sewage. And over the last 20 years, John Yu had busied himself signing his name over the corner of that once great continent. John Yu shut down the satellite link and followed his hairy beer belly back to the front of the ship. Before he could reach the safety webbing, a massive pocket of methane turbulence rocked the refuse craft and sent him staggering into the first aid box. As he lurched to his feet, a second methane blast hit the ship. As he slithered helplessly backwards, his flailing arm caught the door release mechanism and the cockpit's emergency exit swung open. For 30 seconds he dangled, screaming over Europe. Then he plunged from the yawning garbage ship and drowned in his own signature. "You was ear," it said. And it was right, he was. The methane storm whipped up to hurricane force and sucked the ship to the ground. A continent of methane exploded. The blast triggered off a thermonuclear reaction in 1,000 discarded atomic power stations, and the Earth tore itself from its orbit around the Sun and blew its way out of the solar system. The Earth was free. Free from humankind, free from civilization. When it was clear of the sun's influence, it froze in heatless space and bathed its wounds in a perennial ice age. On it went, out of the solar system and into deep space, carving a path through the universe, looking for a new sun to call home. Lister woke up. A gargantuan coughing fit forced his body into a ball and thrashed it about under the heavy quilting of the sleep sheet before his head finally emerged from under the covers, gasping for air. He tottered over to the viewport window and scanned the ground. The snow and ice had disappeared, revealing the terrain beneath. Bizarrely, insanely, it seemed to be composed of broken bottles. He looked around. The whole of the mountain appeared to be glass. Millions upon millions of glass bottles, all shapes, all sizes, but only one colour: green. In fact, as he looked through the acid mist, he realised that all the mountains looming around him were likewise constructed of green bottles. What was this place? Rimmer, Crichton and the cat disembarked from the shuttle bus mid-afternoon the previous Tuesday and staggered surreally up the metal ramp to the drive room. "Look, stay calm," said Rimmer, manically pacing up and down in front of the vast screen. "It'll take Holly 10 seconds to work out what to do, and then we'll be out of here." "Does anybody want toast?" They turned and saw the toaster perched on top of a stack of terminals. "No!" they screamed in unison. "How about a crumpet?" Crichton tapped in Holly's activation sequence. "On," said Rimmer. "Holly, we're being sucked into a black hole. How do we get out?" he said. "What?" "Turn him off! We're wasting his run time!" Rimmer yelled. Crichton slammed the flat of his palm on the keypad, and Holly fizzled away. "What's wrong with him?" "It's the dilation effect. His terminals are spread all over the ship. They're all operating in different time zones. While it's midnight Monday for his central processing unit, it's a week on Thursday for his random access memory. Anybody fancy a muffin?" "What happens?" The cat tilted his head to one side. "If we get sucked into this black hole, is that a bad thing?"
"There's no way out, is there?" said Crichton. "We're going to
He smacked his head into a monitor housing and cleared the seizure loop.
die."
"Not necessarily," said the toaster with all the smugness he could muster. "If you don't shut up, I'm going to unplug you." You don't want to know how to get out of this mess, then?" Rimmer spun on his heels. "Oh, and you know, do you? How the smegging smeg would a toaster know how to get out of a black hole?" "Technically, we're not in a black hole. Not yet. We haven't passed the event horizon." "What's an event horizon?" asked the cat. "Let's start at the beginning. A black hole isn't an object, it's a region. A rip in the fabric of space-time. It starts off as a massive sun. When the sun dies, the enormous gravitational pull at its center drags all the matter in the star back into itself. Eventually, the gravitational drag at the center becomes so colossal, the escape velocity, the speed you have to achieve to get out, reaches 186,282 miles per second, which is light speed. And since light speed is the speed limit for the universe, nothing can escape, not even light. It becomes a sort of giant galactic vacuum cleaner, sucking in everything in its range, even time. That's why time at the front of the ship is running more slowly than time at the back. The event horizon is the point of no return. So," he paused, "who's for a hot cross bun?" Rimmer strode across to the toaster. "Holly told you this, didn't he? After he got his IQ back." The toaster's grill glowed red. "Maybe." "Did he happen to mention how to get out of one?" "That depends on whether or not anyone wants any toast." 20 minutes later, Crichton, who had to eat Rimmer's share, was beginning to feel he needed to change his stomach bag. "For God's sakes, are you insane?" Rimmer snapped. "How much toast are you expecting them to eat?" "Here's how to get out of a black hole. Providing you accelerate into it, the additional acceleration provided by the gravitational pull means you can break the light barrier, loop round the singularity at the black hole center, and be traveling fast enough to swoop out again." "So, when we get out," Rimmer frowned, "we're traveling faster than light, yes?" The toaster inclined its bread tray in a nod. "How do we stop? Lister is stuck on that planet starving to death. Assuming Holly was right about all this, and we survive, we've got to rescue him. How do we stop?" "Well now." The toaster twirled his browning knob from side to side. "Wouldn't you like to know?" "Yes, we would," said the cat politely. "Well, for your part, the answer's simple." "What?" "Keep eating the toast." The cat groaned and reached for his 35th slice. Lister tried to move his arm again. His thighs throbbed. His shoulders ached. He was just a pair of lungs, scorched and straining. He struck for the top of the hill. He lunged over the brow and started clattering down the other side. His fall was broken by a bank of bottles. He stumbled along the glass mountain ridge and found a cave. Hardly a cave, more a bolt hole, no more than 6 feet deep and 4 feet high. He crawled inside, curled up baby tight, and slept. Less than 20 minutes later, Lister woke up. The sound that roused him was the thick, wet sound of rainfall. Torrents of thick, black syrup drooled over the mountainside. Lister reached out a quivering hand and caught a glob of the viscous goo in his palm. He sniffed it. He tasted it. He spat it out. It was raining oil. Lister ran. He had no idea where he was running or whether there was any point. The black sky hurled javelins of oil at his shivering, wretched body as he crumbled to his knees and skidded and slithered into the next basin. The oil weighted his locks, and the wind whipped them across his face as oily fingers jabbed down his throat, forcing him to gag for air. Blind and choking, he wiped the worst of the oil from his eyes with what remained of his T-shirt and blinked up against the hammering rain. He wasn't alone. Looming on the horizon were the colossal silhouettes of 5 faces, or rather 5 half-faces, which thrust out of the sea of garbage as if they were seeking one last breath before they were claimed by the refuse. Lister knew them. He recognized them all. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, Theodore Roosevelt, and perhaps the greatest American president of all time, Elaine Salinger. He knew where he was now. Mount Rushmore, South Dakota. This hellhole of a planet, this uninhabitable pit of filth, was Earth. Lister laughed. This was Earth. He was home. But what had happened? What had been done to the place? Was the Earth waging a war against him? Against him personally? But why? Why would it want to kill him? What had he ever done to the Earth? Then he knew. He'd done everything to Earth. He'd crucified it. He was a member of the human race, part of the species that had spread like bacteria over the planet, killing its rich, teeming life, consuming its wealth, finally rendering it fit only for use as a dumping ground for all humanity's garbage. A sheet of lightning ignited the rain, blasting Lister across the mounds of garbage which were alive with rivers of fire. "Do it then!" Lister screamed. "Kill me! Come on! What are you waiting for?" Lister collapsed to his knees on the smouldering garbage. "I could do something. If you let me live, I could start to make it right again. I could." He blacked out. As consciousness slowly percolated back into Lister's body, he became aware of the rain. He groaned and raised his head. It was rain. Real rain. H2O, the stuff of life. He let it cascade over him, cleansing his wounds, refreshing him, uplifting him. He'd rolled onto his belly to pick himself up when he saw it. Out of the rubble, out of the garbage, out of the stinking mire poked a single branch. A small, stunted tree with a crop of green berries. Lister plucked off the fruit and started to eat. They were olives. He wept. He cupped his hands and collected some rainwater, which he sprinkled tenderly over the tree. He heard a movement in the rubble behind him. He turned. He wasn't the only living creature on the planet. There was at least one other. The creature joined him by the olive tree. It was one of the oldest of Earth's inhabitants. It had been there long before man, and would probably be there long after. It was a cockroach. A very big cockroach. This cockroach could have played nose tackle for the London Jets in their all-time best season. This cockroach was 8 feet long. Lister moved slowly. He rocked back on his rump, drew his knees up to his chest, and with a sudden, swift movement brought both his boots down on the roach's side. and the cockroach lay on its back, rocking helplessly, its mandibles opening and closing in shock. Lister ferreted among the rubble for something lethal and found a long shard of glass. He stood over the writhing beast, his hands raised above his head. The glass flashed down towards the soft underbelly. Then he stopped. He flung the glass blade away, then stooped and lifted the cockroach back onto its feet. "Here." Lister plucked an olive from the branch and held it out for the cockroach to take. "I'm a reformed species. No more killing." The giant insect ignored the olive. Instead, it nuzzled among the rubble and started to eat the garbage. Lister sat there chewing his olives, watching the mammoth roach consume the refuse. It seemed like a hell of a good deal to him. The meal over, Lister decided to head back to Starbug and see if there was anything left he might salvage. As he walked across the rubble, he realized the cockroach was following. Lister broke into a trot. So did the cockroach. Finally, Lister slowed and stopped. The cockroach pushed its head in the crook of Lister's knees and nudged the back of his legs. It wanted to carry him. And when an 8-foot cockroach wants to give you a ride, Lister reasoned, probably the smartest thing to do was to let it. Just after he splayed his legs over its back and tucked his fingers under the rim of its armor plating, the cockroach took off. It was taking him home to meet its folks. Halfway up a tall bottle mountain, they landed. The 20 or so members of the roach's clan surrounded them, whistling and clicking and rubbing their hind legs together in insect delight. Plainly, Lister was a hit. One of the roaches retired to the back of the cave and dragged a half-rotten sofa carcass to Lister's feet. The family looked on in mute anticipation. Lister did something then he wouldn't have done in any other circumstances whatsoever. He started to eat a sofa. There was a cacophony of whirs, clicks and whistles. "Well, it's been absolutely wonderful," Lister found himself saying. "And you serve a wicked rotting sofa, but I really must be going." He nodded, threw in a few clicks and whistles for good measure, and climbed on the first roach's back. It waddled speedily down the length of the cave and flung itself over the mountainside. When Lister opened his eyes, he found to his alarm he was flying in formation, at the head of a swarm of cockroaches, and as they flew down the middle of the valley, more and more were emerging from their caves and taking up their place behind him. By the simple expedient of consuming a tiny portion of a decomposing 3-piece suite, Lister had been anointed King of the Cockroaches. Lister and his loyal subjects were going to start putting the planet back together again. The colossal cone-shaped jet housings on Red Dwarf's underbelly screamed and whined in their losing battle against the irresistible drag of the black hole's gravitational pull. Suddenly, as one, they ceased their pointless protestations and puttered into silence. The massive mining vessel catapulted into the blackness. The combination of jet thrust and gravitational pull forced Red Dwarf through the lightspeed barrier the moment it hit the event horizon. To all intents and purposes, the ship no longer existed in the universe of its origin. It shrugged off Newton, Einstein, Oppenheimer, and Chen Lao, and subscribed to a completely new set of physical laws. The cat's body started to spill off the couch in every direction. Long, thin strands of what had formerly been him slithered across the floor and intertwined with the strands that had been Crichton and Rimmer and the toaster. The anti-grav chamber became a sea of heaving, screaming, living linguini. Everyone became part of everyone else. They threaded together and formed a new whole. They weren't four, they were one. The particles that had once formed Rimmer's intelligence, in a blinding flash of empathetic insight, suddenly became aware of the desperate, monumental importance of toast. Instantaneously, the strands that had been the toaster were conscious of the overriding necessity for dressing well and having a really terrific haircut. The vermicelli that was now the cat tasted the feeling of being mechanical and knew with unshakable certainty that silicon heaven existed, and the best way to get there was through diligent hoovering. Simultaneously, the macaroni that was Crichton knew what it was like to be Rimmer. He understood what it was like to have had those parents, that childhood, that career, that life. It was impossible to scream, but that's what Crichton was trying to do. "Look!" said a part of the spaghetti that was mostly Rimmer. In the center of the spinning light were 6 interlocking coils, like fiber optics, but of a size beyond size. The immense hollow cables twisted and undulated like the snakes on the Gorgons' heads. The tubes were of colors that had no meaning to the human eye. They spun and swirled in a timeless dance of beauty. Not for the first time, Rimmer cursed himself for not bringing his camcorder. "What is it?" he said. But before anyone could answer, the ship slung around the singularity and lunged desperately for the surface, for the event horizon, for the known universe, fighting off the gravity that tried to suck it back to the core at the speed of light. Then, the light-speed drag of gravity cancelled out the light-speed momentum of the ship, and Red Dwarf regained its physical form. Suddenly, it was travelling at a relative speed of less than 200,000 miles an hour. The metal of the bulkheads buckled and groaned. Leering cracks ripped through the metalwork and zigzagged insanely down the port side. The ship started to slow. The jet housings started to creak, and then, all over the vessel's belly, one by one, pinion rods snarled and snapped, and the housings came away and tumbled into the infinite abyss. Still the ship slowed. Like a harpooned whale, the wounded craft pitched wildly for the surface, for light, for life. Relatively, the ship was moving at barely 50 miles an hour. Then 30. 20. 10. The black hole had just to claim one more jet housing to tip the balance, to drag the ship below light speed and trap it forever in its bleak embrace. It didn't. With the suddenness of an infant's birth scream, Red Dwarf exploded through the event horizon and into the known universe. The despaghettified cat looked down his body and checked it was all there. It seemed to be. "Everyone okay?" "What was that?" said Rimmer. "In the middle of the spinning light, those tubes." "The Omni Zone," said the toaster. "Holly predicted we'd find that. It confirms his theory that there are 6 other universes, and all their gateways converge at the center of a singularity." "There are 6 other universes?" "So Holly reckoned. He also believed that our universe is the bad apple. Something went wrong with our Big Bang and made time move in the wrong direction, and that's why nothing makes sense." The 2 transport craft skirted Red Dwarf's mangled hull before swooping down into the planet's atmosphere. When they hit the thick grey cloud bank, the craft peeled off. White Giant with Rimmer and the cat took the northern hemisphere, and Blue Midget, piloted by Crichton and the toaster, zoomed south. Rimmer stared unblinking into the screen of the infrared scannerscope as White Giant swept across the surface of the planet. "What's happened to the snow? Where's the Ice Age gone?" The cat increased the magnification factor, and they stared at the mountain ranges of green bottles looming below them. "Bottles! What is this place?" Rimmer shrugged and turned back to the heat scanner. Nothing. "This is hopeless. We could fly around for years and not find him. One man on a planet this size? It's like trying to find a hidden can of lager at a student party." The cat was beginning to panic. He'd gone almost 2 hours without a bath, or even a light shower. He was beginning to smell like a human. He snapped the controls over to automatic and shimmied off to the changing cubicle. The cat was less than an hour into his ablutions when Rimmer spotted the starbug. "Look! There it is!" The cat dashed out of the cubicle, dripping underneath his bathrobe, his shower cap still in place. "There!" Rimmer pointed at the magnified video image. The cat squelched into the drive seat, looped White Giant over for an investigatory pass, and landed 400 yards from the stricken craft. Rimmer and the cat knew there was no one alive on board long before they scrambled over the dunes of glass and stood in front of the gutted bug. Inside there was nothing. They knew they wouldn't find anything. but they decided to look around anyway. None of it made sense to Rimmer. He'd left Lister on an ice planet. Somehow the ice had melted, exposing this strange terrain of geographical features, apparently built from glass.
Hey!
Rimmer looked up. The cat was standing high on a ridge overlooking the wreck of the Starbug.
Look at this!
Rimmer picked his way up the jagged slope of the Bottle Mountain and looked down into the next basin. Spread out below them were acres on acres of rich, verdant pasture land. Fields of wheat, fields of corn, and fields of barley shimmered in the easy breeze of the sheltered valley. A long, thin stream of gurgling blue glinted its length. Trees, not very tall but strong and young, sprouted in thick forests around the perimeter. And in the center of the valley, in the heart of a vast olive grove, smoke curled from the chimney stack of a small homestead. Distantly, in a thin rectangular patch of brown, a tiny figure was dragging a handmade plough across a half-furrowed field.
Red Dwarf, Better Than Life, was written by Grant Naylor and performed by Chris Barry. Additional music and effects were by Nick Graham. Technical presentation by John Etchells. Produced by Chris Wallace.